Hi, everybody. Welcome to Life Stories Podcast, Ministries Making a Difference. I'm Shara Goswick, your host. My guest today is Stacey Womack. Stacey founded Abuse Recovery Ministry and Services many years ago, and this ministry is helping people all over the world heal from abuse, all forms of abuse. They have some great programs. They do incredible things with couples, with individuals, with marriages, with relationships, with just people that want to be healed from hurt and wounds from different forms of abuse. Everything is free. It is online. It is a nonprofit. You can go to their website to see the programs they offer. And if you or someone you know needs help or just wants to learn how to be healed, maybe it's been long ago from your past, but you know there are still things that you need to recover from, you need to heal from, I would encourage you to check out what Stacey is doing. It's important and it's a big deal. I'm so glad that I got to talk to her today. Thanks for being here. Well, thank you, Stacey, for talking to me today. I have been very impressed with people that I've talked to on my podcast who start something like a nonprofit or a program when it wasn't something that directly affected them. And I know what you're doing is a really big thing, but I read that it wasn't because you went through this. This is just something you felt like the Lord was leading you to do. And that always, not that it's not impressive anyway, but it always just is amazing to me for people that start these programs because they feel like this is something they're supposed to do. So I think that's incredible. So you have started a lot, but you've started Abuse Recovery Ministry Services, ARMS. Tell everybody what that is and why you felt like you needed to do this.
Okay, well, Abuse Recovery Ministry and Services is a nonprofit. I started in um, 1997, but incorporated about a year and a half later and had our nonprofit status within like 3 months. So that was pretty crazy.
Wow.
I wasn't planning on starting a nonprofit. That was part of the deal. So,
Yeah.
but we provide our largest program is to provide free recovery programs for women who've experienced abuse or are experiencing abuse. So to be at any level of that. And we talk about abuse in all different forms. And we serve people for free. The women just call. They don't have to get us their name. They don't have to sign up. There's no intake. They can bring a female support friend with them if they want. We have in-person groups and Zoom groups. And we have it translated into 6 languages. So besides English, we have
Wow.
Spanish, Russian, German, Kiswahili, Russian, and Polish. I can't remember how something like that. Anyway, God has just really grown this thing both nationally and internationally. That's
Yeah.
the largest program, but then we also provide intervention. So for more than 2 decades, we've been doing intervention for providing help for men who use abusive behaviors and also women who use abusive behaviors. So we work with kind of the whole gamut. We have a really clear understanding of the issues on both sides.
Yeah.
And I think that makes us really balanced in the work that we do.
Yeah.
And besides that, we do a lot of training for the especially faith community. That I also speak at a lot of national conferences, pregnancy centers, Union Gospel Rescue Mission, which is City Gate Network, which is their hub for their missions. So yeah, I was just a stay-at-home mom with my 6 kids homeschooling and doing what I felt God had called me to do.
You were not just a stay-at-home mom of your 6
Right.
kid homeschooling. That is a full-time job. A couple of
Right, absolutely, and I felt so called to it, which I always say, I feel like everything I do is kind of, I'm in the most least likely category because I didn't even like babysitting before I got married, so the fact that God gave me kids with or without birth control, you know, uh, I just love being a mom and I felt very called to homeschooling, so that was really my calling, and I was in the midst of that when God began to speak to me about ministry beyond my family.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what that was, so I spent a couple years just praying about it. I didn't tell anybody that I felt God had called me to ministry until about a year and a half later, I went to a pastor in my church and said, and told him what I felt like I was saying, even though I didn't know exactly what it was gonna be. He goes, "You've known for a year and a half and you haven't done anything?" And I went home and I thought, "God, I've known for a year and a half and I haven't done anything." And God said, "Not yet." And so another 6 months went by, and this was the door he opened, and I couldn't have been more shocked. Somehow I had my own ideas of that. I would be doing something that I knew something about,
Right.
had some type of background in, but I really believe, and I say this all the time, that God is the one who birthed this ministry because he heard the cries of those who are experiencing abuse. I really truly believe that. And I just get to be the nanny to the organization. And if God had told me we'd be where we're at today, back then I probably would have ran because
Right.
I had no intentions. And, even prior to God calling me to ministry, I was like, don't put me in leadership, God. You can't trust me. Um, and God put me in leadership. And the day that we were recording this is actually my 28th year anniversary today of doing this work. So,
That's amazing. That is amazing. Well, you mentioned it, but I was gonna ask if you did Zoom or, online, some kind of online program, so it's not just people that live where you are, it's people obviously from all over. Yeah.
we have in-person groups all across the United States and in other countries. But if we don't have something in someone's area or it doesn't work out, then we have Zoom groups, usually multiple per day, except for Sunday,
Yeah.
is the only day we don't have covered right now. But yeah, so it's just expanded and God has grown it. And it's not me pushing it, it's more like me trying to keep up with it
Right.
and why God does what he wants to do. So.
That's amazing. So, what about her journey? I think this is such an incredible thing because it starts at 14 and up, and you hate the thought of someone that young being in a relationship that is abusive in any way, but it happens, and that's so scary. It's so scary, so I love that y'all have that. Now I wonder if there are women listening or, I mean, anybody out there who's in a relationship, but they don't think it's abusive. They don't see a problem. Do you deal with that? Do you meet people like that that just don't
All
see? Yeah.
All the time. Yeah, most women wouldn't actually consider themselves victims because of how they define abuse. It's so narrowly defined as
Right.
physical abuse, and actually most abuse isn't physical, even though it's the number one cause of injury to women in the US and in the world.
Right.
So you can see what a huge issue it is. The biggest form of abuse uses psychological or emotional abuse, but verbal is a close second.
Yeah.
And then we talk about, so we talk about verbal, psychological, physical, financial, sexual, property, spiritual, and animal.
Wow.
And then we go into great depth of what would be more obvious forms of abuse to the forms of abuse that aren't so obvious. So the reality is that we've all used some level of abuse. We've all said something we shouldn't have said that was hurtful or manipulated someone somehow. But the reality is that someone who's abusive is using a pattern of behaviors over and over and over again. So a lot of women would say, well, he's never hit me, so I've never really been abused, is actually not correct because abuse just means the misuse of. So
Right.
something with misusing their words or misusing finances or misusing scripture,
Yeah.
all the different ways in a way to gain power and control over their partner, um, it's abusive, and that is not what God intended for relationships at all.
Right.
So helping these women, we just walk alongside them in their own personal journey. Some women have been out of it for years and attend just to finish up their healing, and some grew up in it but didn't marry into it to go through it just for that.
Right.
Maybe a little bit more focused towards intimate partners, but really it works for everybody. And that it's just truth. And so even women who train, who didn't go through abuse like myself, who go through the training and go through the lessons are just God moves and it's just so anointed. The her dream materials are so anointed. It's a total of 15 classes, but we lead them year round so women can join immediately. They don't have to wait till week 1 and they don't have to pay a penny.
Oh, wow. That is incredible. I love that. What are some of the takeaways for these young women? I mean, it amazes me that they even need it that young, but I know they do. I know it's real. What are some of the takeaways? What are some of the things they learn through her journey when they're going through that program?
Well, let me just preface this with we don't have many that young coming to our group. The reality is that it's their dating violence and actually most physical abuse is done with younger women.
Right.
So 14 through, 25 is like the highest rate of usually physical abuse going on.
Yeah.
But and that doesn't include all the other forms of abuse.
Right.
So a lot of the women don't come to us until they're a little bit older because they're still trying to make the relationship work. He said he was sorry, he promised not to do it again, he promised to go to counseling, and nobody gets in a relationship to see it end, so we do everything we can to try and make it work. And so it's usually at a very, like, dark place for a lot of these women where they come in, the
Yeah.
program, and some of the takeaways and probably the main things, let me just throw out the 2 main things we hear over and over. Now I don't just know that God loves me, I believe it. Now I don't just know that God values me, I believe it.
Right.
When you go from knowing from a head place to believing from a heart place, you make different and so you start setting boundaries, even though it's scary, and you start making different choices. You start looking at the options you have. What is God calling you to do in this? You know, most, especially women in faith, do not get a whole lot of support from the faith community because they're not trained, and because sometimes they they make the relationship more important than the person. And I don't believe that God would ever sacrifice a person for the sake of a relationship, even though I'm all for
Right.
reconciliation. My husband and I have been married for 45 years, okay?
Right.
So I
Right.
believe in this, and we know the hard work it takes to make relationships work.
Yeah.
But you cannot change another person. So if he's not willing to get the help, then it leaves her in a really hard spot of making decisions about what she should do. We just started, my husband and I are co facilitating a national Zoom group for men right now. And we've been asked that for the last couple of years, but haven't been had the time or the ability to do it. Zoom isn't the best way to do intervention,
Right.
but we have so many women nationally whose husbands, they're setting this as a boundary. You need to go to a program. And either there's not a program in their area. There's definitely probably very few faith-based programs anywhere in the nation. But there are also organizations that can't take voluntary men just because they're taking mandated men. We work with both. So, and we're good at what we do, and I really believe in that intervention side. There is nothing the woman, the victim in the situation can do to change herself, to change the relationship, and we do that, those women. We try everything. We pray hard,
Right.
fast, we get all the self-help books on how to be a better wife, we go to all the conferences, you know, all those things. Abuse is different than normal marital conflict
Right.
or relationship conflict, and when they're treated the same, it causes problems. So couples counseling doesn't work in these situations. They need to work on it separately. She needs to work on her issues and her healing. He needs to be held accountable and work on his healing and his issues and work to transform the way he thinks and the things he believes that have been justifying his abusive behaviors. I'm very passionate about the intervention work we do because I believe that it's important to help victims of abuse and survivors of abuse heal. But if we're only catching those being pushed off the cliff, but we're not going to the top of the cliff, talking what they're doing the pushing, then we're not really solving the problem.
Right.
So, you know, we are respectful. It's not an easy class, very highly accountable. But I have 4 sons, and I think about how would I want my own sons to be treated, and and God loves them. And when they sit before me to do an intake, I think someone's been praying for them.
Right.
You
Right.
know, even our guys who are coming out of prison or whatever, it's like they had a grandma or mom or dad or someone who's been praying for them, and they're here because of that. God's giving them another opportunity to make change. Whether they take it, that's up to them.
Right.
At least if they're in a group, they have the opportunity to make change.
Yeah. I volunteer at a pregnancy center every week, and, I'm gonna keep your name and all your information because we've seen situations like this before, and it's so difficult when you are working with someone and they don't see the abuse, they don't see any problems, and you know being on the outside, you know exactly what it is, and so oh, it's hard. It's hard when you wanna help somebody make those changes and they're not willing to do it. So, I just love this. So, you work with abusers also, people who know that they need to change. Tell me about those programs.
So Mankind is our men's program, and we meet our state standards, but it's a minimum of 36 sessions. Actually, I feel it's better when the guys are in the group for about a year, or
Yeah.
our voluntary guys stay with us a couple years, uh, so they can have sustained change, not just make change temporarily. They've done the study many years ago that showed that 12-week programs don't work at all. So the longer the program, the better. Yeah, but I'm not just working on the behavioral changes. That's more like anger management. We're actually working on the root of the issue. So we're working on the beliefs behind what give them permission to behave this way. And it takes a long time to change belief systems. So we allot the 12 men in the group. They have to do an intake. They have to attend regularly. There's homework. There's books to read. They have to be accountable for their past behaviors and how it's impacted their loved ones.
Yeah.
And we have to work towards change. And we also work with women who are abusive, who've also been victimized. And
Mm.
actually, most of our men had experienced some form of abuse in their childhood, at least some level of abuse. Probably 95% of our guys have. But for our women, they're often in an abusive relationship, but they kind of see themselves more as fighters. And so they fight back and don't always gain control, but they get a little payback from their abuse. And I've had a few women who've joined who were abused as children, and they don't want to repeat that in motherhood. And
Yeah.
so they come because they want to work on making sure that they're handling conflict well and we in every single program, we work on not just knowing, but understanding that God loves you, that you have value, that you're accepted, that you're forgiven if you've asked, that you're important, that you're powerful. All those things that are a part of who God has made us to be.
Yeah, I was gonna ask how faith worked because I know it's a faith-based program, how faith worked into the healing journey for them. For someone not being in an abusive situation, going from that but knowing it to believing it is such a big thing. And so what all do you do, faith-wise, to help them through this?
So her journey is based off of Psalms 23. So we actually use a piece of that passage every single lesson. So we're talking about what does this look like from God's perspective? So, what has God had to say about this? And while you may not be able to find the word abuse in the Bible, oppression would be the word, because that's really what abuse is oppression. And abuse started as early as Adam and Eve, because we have Cain and Abel. That was the first domestic violence when Cain killed Abel, and so it's been around a long time. So we talk about that. We talk about what does God mean by some of these scriptures that make it hard for women to know what they should do in their situations. And so we walk them through. We have a class on submission versus oppression. What's the difference between the two?
Yeah.
And we do this. We do have a similar lesson with our men and women in intervention. We talk about submission versus oppression and how are they doing this. And in our men's and women's program, we talk about, especially in our men's program, we talk a lot about what does it mean to love like Christ. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of our men who are active in their faith know their Bible, but they don't know how to live it. So when we ask questions, so how would you handle this? Well, I would just be more Christ-like. Well, what does that mean? Well, I would be kind. I said, well, what does that look like? What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Like laying your life down for your wife, what does that mean? And the guys are usually thinking of throwing themselves in front of their wives if a bull was coming at them. But I'm like, what does it mean when there's only one piece of chocolate cake left in the fridge and you both on it, right?
Right.
You know? I mean, we get down to the really nitty-gritty of, hey,
Right.
you need to lay down your life.
Yeah.
Look, Jesus came, lay down everything to benefit us. And God is saying to men, this is the way I want you to love your wife. I want you to lay everything down to benefit her. And it's very opposite to what our world teaches men. Oh, yes. And it feels upside down and backwards to the men at first. But as I begin to practice the things we talk about, they come back and they're like, "Oh my gosh, it worked." And the guys commonly their most common response to going through the program is that they grow in self-respect because they really don't like who they are. I mean, they may act all that narcissistic behavior that they're using like they're all that, but the reality is that deep down inside there it's insecurity. It's just a cover
Oh,
up
yeah.
insecurity. And there's a big difference between narcissistic behavior and having narcissistic personality disorder. There is a difference between the two. And if any personality disorder presents very differently in group to us.
Sure.
They're a little odd, but all the men and all the women who use abuse have some narcissistic tendencies.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what, it's all about me, right? That's
Right.
the whole premise of it.
Sure.
So if the Bible's saying it's not all about you, love others more than you love yourself, but what does that look like? And that doesn't mean don't love yourself, but it means to, like actually lay your life down and what does that look like? How do you do that? And
Yeah.
I tell the guys, this is the place to share anything that you feel shameful about because where else are you going to get the opportunity to do this?
Right.
That's talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then let's talk about how we could have done it differently. Let's give you some ideas. In Oregon, where I'm from, they require male-female co-facilitation, which is the best way to do it,
Right.
and, we get to model shared power. I get to be the feminine perspective and make sure the voice of the victim is always heard, and so, some of the women whose husbands were working with some of the women or boyfriends, some of the women worry that he's convinced us because he's so good at convincing people. I had one woman say,
Right.
"So, ice cubes to Eskimo." But the reality is that most of the time, we're pretty good at being able to tell whether someone is blowing this smoke at us and
Yeah.
all the things we want. And, sometimes, especially in the beginning, they do that. And we're just, it's nice to get, they're like, oh, this is so great, so great. But I'm like, whatever. I don't know that I believe you yet because I think you're, just trying to make yourselves look good.
Right. You've done it for a long time, so they they surely shouldn't think that they can just trick you in the beginning because you've been at this for a really long time. What are some misconceptions people have about domestic violence?
Well, I think the first one is that it's about physical abuse only. I think that's the first one. And I also think that, and like I said, that is the number one cause of injury. So the statistic is 1 in 3 women have experienced physical or sexual or stalking behaviors by an intimate partner.
Yeah.
And the reason that stalking is important is because stalkers are 75% more likely, or 75% of all those who've committed domestic homicide stalk their partner.
Wow.
So stalking is a big deal. So that's a big number when we talk 1 in 3.
Sure.
That means no matter where I go, there are victims or survivors in the audience or people who are using abuse.
Mm.
Uh, and I think the other thing that, especially within the faith community, is that they don't believe it's happening in their community
Right.
and your church. And the reality is that the number is so big, and one of the abuse isn't physical, so the number is way bigger than 1 in 3. And I can't tell you that, when I started the group in my own church, I kept telling myself to stop being shocked because I was very active in my church. I knew these people. And they
Right.
would come up privately and tell me after they found out I was doing this work and tell me that they were in an abusive relationship. And I was shocked because they just like look like the perfect family and they're involved in church just as much as I am. And I think that if pastors will begin to speak about it, get educated and speak about it and know where to send them, they don't have to have all the answers,
Right.
know what to do, know how to recognize it and what to do, and make it safe, a lot more women would come forward, and men would come forward for help.
Sure.
If we have a husband and wife who've gone through programs and they've made good progress, and we had both of them share, the men in the room are often more likely to come forward and say, "Yeah, I've done some of these things too." Well,
Wow.
and there are male victims as well, but they
Yeah.
talk very much like our female victim. There are also female primary aggressors. They also sound very much like our male primary aggressors.
Wow. Yeah. What if somebody's listening right now and they suspect that somebody in their family or a friend of theirs is in an abusive relationship? What is the best thing they can do to help them?
They need to make sure they speak to them privately if they share, "Hey, did you know that behavior that they just did was abusive?" And they may not like that, they may get angry about that, but sometimes it's the beginning of their journey to have somebody call it out for what it is because they think, "No, that's not abuse."
Yeah.
And then just letting them know, "Hey, I got this resource, we have these flyers that we put in the bathroom stalls, especially in churches, but anywhere we can." And
Yeah.
they can tear off it and put it in their shoes so they can hide it. It takes the women usually 6 months to a year to actually call us,
Wow.
and because it's scary and
Yeah.
taking a lot of courage to step out. So just letting her know there's resources. Also, there's books, and we have a book that I go through all the types of abuse. We also have some training videos on our website,
Yeah.
and pregnancy centers, use Bright Course, which is a
Mhm.
subscription based thing. We, if it's, we're on there. We're like
Yeah.
the second most watched one that they have.
Oh, really?
Yes, and then we have,
That's what we use is Bright Course.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so then, but if they're not on Bright Course, if we have people listening, we actually have those Bright Course recordings on our website that they can
Okay.
basically rent for a couple months for a very low cost so they can watch them. There's like 10, 12 10, 15-minute segments.
Yeah.
They're really well done, and they get a lot of information. So, yeah, really important, especially, when you're talking about young women, because they're not willing to know this
Right.
because they want the relationship to work,
Yeah.
helping them to just recognize and going through the types of abuse. For me, doing that in any setting is my number one goal
Sure.
because most people don't have a way to define it. So I listed the types too, but I didn't go through what's in each category.
You mentioned it before, but I just want to clarify it again. The difference between abuse and just people who are fighting or, they're irritable or whatever. There is a difference. So clarify that one more time for me.
Sure. So in a marriage, and marriages have struggles. We all have struggles in our marriages. When it's this normal conflict, there isn't a fear of safety, emotional safety, or physical safety. There's a willingness to look at themselves and work together.
Right.
We might have a power struggle here and there for sure. And
Yeah.
it's not always easy. It takes a lot of work. There has to be a willingness in a relationship where it's about power and control. The person who's using the abuse, using the power and control tactics, will misuse counseling session and use them against her, and if she shares anything, it creates an unsafety for her. So when
Yeah.
she goes home, now she's more likely to experience more abuse because she just shared the secret that he didn't want shared.
Yeah.
So we have on our website free PDFs that people can download, the 12 reasons why couples counseling doesn't work with us. And believe me, 99% of all the women that we work with had tried couples counseling. Some of
Wow.
our women had tried up to 15 counselors, but it just doesn't work
Oh
because
my goodness.
they're not willing to work mutually, not willing to look at himself. So as long as he's unwilling to look at himself, we gotta do it separately to create safety. So, actually, we think separations, where abuse is present is very helpful. We find that the couples that live together while we're working with both sides, it slows the process way down because you're still focusing on the other person. We're going to focus them on them and their relationship with God and what is God calling them to. So, they can do it together, but it's just a very slow road.
Right, that makes sense. What if there's a survivor that's listening that wants to reach out? What kind of encouragement could you offer someone who has gotten out of a situation, they know they need help? How could you encourage them?
I just want them to know that I think they're very courageous and very brave, and that there's help for them, and that getting to a safe place and getting back on your feet is important, that only Jesus is the restorer of our soul. And so her journey provides that validation for what you've experienced, God's heart that he sees you and he is not okay with us, and uh, that they can begin to find that healing, full healing, so that at one point you're a victim, and it's not a popular word in the domestic violence community. They don't like the word
Right.
victim. They use survivor all the time. So, but at some point, you're a victim, and that's how the criminal community defines it. You're victimized. And then
Mhm.
you get out of it and you survived it, so you're a survivor. But God has not called us to survive life. He called
Right.
us more than conquerors. So, what we want to do is help these women move through the phases so they can be those overcomers, those conquerors that God has called them to be. So, abuse may be a part of their story, but it shouldn't be a life sentence. And they shouldn't have to suffer their whole life because of the abuse that happened to them. I want them to find joy and see the good future that God has in store for them. And that this is, we all have stories, but it,
Mhm.
it doesn't define us because
Right.
God created us and He created us and He said it was good. So we're not broken in God's eyes. He sees us as whole, and we need to see ourselves the way He sees us.
Absolutely.
That so that we can move out into the great things that He's called us to, because He predestined before we were born the plans He had for us, the people we were gonna touch, the lives we were gonna change. And He has that for every woman and every man who's listening. That's true of them as well.
Yeah, I love that. That is so good. I wanted to ask you about the book that you wrote, the On the Front Lines of Abuse. Why did you write that and what is it about?
So, honestly, I wrote it because, we were doing a national campaign and they said it'd be easier to to so I had to put I based it off of one of my many, many trainings that I did,
Yeah.
it's very small, which is great. Pastors love it because it's written to the whole faith community. So I
Yeah.
talk about talking about my personal experience of my sister marrying a pastor who was abusive and not telling anybody, well,
Mhm.
11 years later. And we didn't know how to support her because we didn't understand it at the time. That wasn't my reason for stepping into this work, but that was like my first touch of with
Right.
the abuse. And so we talk about all the forms of abuse. We go through the cycle of abuse. And then I say, okay, what do you do if you're experiencing abuse? I give you some helps with that. What if you are someone who's using abuse? What do you do? What if you're a female who's using these behaviors? What do you do? And then I talk to the faith community and leadership and say, what do you do? And I actually go through and show like how they can do an appropriate separation agreement, what
Mm.
it look like. And I did a podcast with a pastor, and he's like, "Oh, Stacey," he goes, "I have some ideas, but this gave me so much more." And he was so grateful. And then I did a podcast with a woman who was a survivor, and she goes, "Stacey," and she did podcasts with all about domestic violence. And she
Yeah.
goes, "Reading your book brought a whole new level of healing to me." What he
Wow.
validated her experience.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so it's just meant to be a help to anybody. And it's so small, it's just a little book, it's easy to read. I have other books I've written, but that's the one I've written for arms and,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that. So, how can people get involved or help your ministry?
So, we serve a very large geographic, worldwide kind of The but if you look at our finances, you would never know that. So,
Right.
obviously, finances would be, like donations and
Yeah.
it'd be great. But also for women who are listening who are saying, "Hey, I'd like to lead this in my own church or in my own pregnancy
Mhm.
center or in the prisons," because we do that there, or in a recovery home. Wherever we train, like,
Wow.
virtually women all over the world and
Yeah.
start a new round every 8 weeks. So every
Oh my
I
goodness.
lead the first 8 weeks of it, and then there's another 5 weeks of online education that we have them do, and then we support them in starting her journey wherever they want to lead,
Yeah.
and so that's how we expand. We're very volunteer driven. So,
Yeah.
if they want to do that, or maybe that isn't really what God is calling them to, but helping to get the word out and
Yeah.
letting them introducing us to their faith community so that we can do a training for their staff
Yeah.
or to the faith community or whatever we can do to help. I mean, we really our heart is really to help people.
Sure.
And I've had like divorce care have me come in and I'll speak, but now we have these, like, little short little videos that they can rent for this little bit of time, and you can just show this one that talks about the types of abuse and the cycle of abuse, and that's all they really wanted for their divorce care group was just to get some education around that.
Yeah.
And that way, they don't have to pay me anything,
Right.
not that I charge, it's more of a donation, but they can just have it and show it and then talk about it and understand it
Yeah.
better that way.
That's awesome. Is there something that I did not ask you about that you want to tell me about?
You know, yeah, a lot of women say, "How I know if it's abusive or not?"
Yeah.
Uh, and that is a common question that we get asked because I bet he hasn't hit me, and so sometimes I'll just send them to a book or 2. We have a book list on our website that they can go and pick up a book, and if they relate to it, it's like a lot of times they'll come back crying and saying, "Well, how did they live in my house? How did they know?"
Wow.
And, but, I've read them, like, The Verbally Abusive Relationship is an older book, but it's been around, it talks about non-physical forms of abuse.
Mhm.
It's not a faith-based book, but she does a good job in it, and, um, and I've read it, and I thought, "Oh, yeah, I've probably done that before because she's talking about verbal forms of abuse, right? Or my husband's maybe done that one. Uh, but I didn't it doesn't I don't connect to it like that. Or I say you can just attend a her journey group, and I would suggest you at least go for 3 lessons, and then if
Yeah.
whether or not this is a fit for you, so I haven't had many of those,
Yeah.
but sometimes you can pick up on that, and so they'll be able to pick up themselves and know. I've told pastors and counselors, it's not your job to define whether or not someone's in abuse.
Right.
So, because a lot of times they'll say, "Well, tell me what's going on." And then they'll decide that it's not abusive. Or they'll say things, "Well, he hasn't hit you in 6 months. You
Mm,
shouldn't feel afraid anymore." The fact that he hit her at all is,
exactly.
even if it was years and years and years ago, is
Yeah.
a big deal because you don't start with physical abuse, you start with all the other forms of abuse. And our older women aren't experiencing physical abuse as much because all he has to do is give her a look now. She's so conditioned, so beat down
Right.
from the abuse. So, helping her to see those types of things and understand that all abuse, no matter what form it comes in, brings death to the person. And God has not called us to live a life of death. In Deuteronomy, he says, I set before you blessing, cursing, life
Mhm.
and death. Therefore, choose life.
Yes.
God calls us to live life abundantly. It doesn't say, I've come that you might divide life. I
Yeah.
get what the word says. I come that you might have life and have it more abundantly.
Right.
And if you're not experiencing that because the relationship and oh, it's so hard. Relationships are really hard. And we as women, I think, are wired to want so badly to see these relationships work.
Yeah.
And men are wired a little bit differently and abusers tend to blame all the problems on their victim. And that means they have no need to make changes because it's her fault. So the men don't come to us because they go, "Oh, I have a problem." It's because their wives or the court system or the Department of Human Services has said, "You've got to go to this." There are women who are voluntary men. They're saying, "For us to have any chance, or maybe I'm done, but you can go to this program." And even at that, I've seen God restore even when the women were really done. Sometimes it doesn't restore the relationship, and I have to honor that too because for some women, they just can't give their heart away one more time.
Right.
But they do need to heal, they do need to forgive, they need to work through those issues, and her journey can help them do that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm so glad to know about this program. Well, I appreciate you talking to me today. This has been great.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Stacy. I will be in touch soon.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
that's great. Okay.
Thank you. Bye bye.